Hey guys, I'm Out of the Ashes 95, and today I'm going to show you how to draw an old school Pikachu, which basically is just a fat Pikachu. He seems to have gotten skinny over time, so I'm going to go old school first and show you a different one on another day. So to start off, we just have two shapes, which is just a circle oval kind of shape for the head, and the oval egg kind of shape for the body. The body is about maybe a little more than double the height of the head. You can kind of see from my sketch layer the difference, and you can kind of eyeball it yourself. So remember, this is a sketch layer that we're doing first. When we get to the lines, you'll know. Until then, if you are in Photoshop or any other kind of drawing program, keep this stuff on a separate layer from your lines that we draw down the road. And if you're doing this on paper, make sure to draw the lines lightly so that you can erase them later. So next, we're going to have the line that's going to go down the center, just to give us an idea of where the center of his body is, because he's not facing us head on. If he was, then it would be a straight line down and a straight line across, but he is at an angle, kind of looks about a 3/4 angle perhaps, so it's going to be this kind of curved line from the top of his head. It curves around to about between his feet, and the line going across his head is going to give us an idea of where we place the eyes. This isn't perfect, and things can change over time, and you'll see that my line here is actually not perfect. All the lines here are just sketches. I didn't worry too much about making them perfect, but it just gives you the idea of where things will be. Next, I moved on to basically the appendages, so the ears, the arms, feet, and the tail. The ears are basically just these triangular shapes, but more curved. Well, I mean, I say triangles. They're not perfect triangles, obviously, but it's the closest shape that I can kind of call it for you guys. But you get the idea. You can kind of see it in the pictures here. And the arms are just basically stubs. He's just got these tiny little arms. They're just fat little arms, and you could just keep them these little curved shapes. We're not going to add the fingers until later on, so don't worry about that. And then the legs themselves are also oval shapes, so they're a lot longer than the ones that we had originally made for the body. And they're just going to be about the same size on either side. It just depends on how much you cut out of the circle you're drawing. You can either draw the full circle or oval to make it easy on you, or you can, or not make it easy on you, but if it's easier for you to do that, then do that. If you just want to draw the curves, then that's fine too. And then the feet. The feet are also kind of ovally, although the one on his left, so to our right, is a little more circular than the one on his right, which would be our left, because of the angle we're seeing it from. There is a thing called foreshortening, which I will probably go over sometime down the road in another video. And it basically is like when things are facing you head on, they tend to look a lot shorter than what we would think they look like, and I'll explain it better in a different video. And then lastly is just the tail, and the tail is just basically kind of rectangles and triangles. You can kind of see how they work. It's not that big of a deal if you get it exactly right. Just get the general shape, which is essentially just a lightning bolt, and just make sure that at the very end of the tail that it's going to be a lot wider. Sorry. Enunciation is difficult. Braces and all that. Now, lastly, it's just going to be the face before we move on to the lines. And if you look at my picture, you can see that the original lines that I had, the original guidelines I had made for where the eyes are going to go were incorrect. I moved the eye when I drew it down a little bit further. Throughout all this, I was using a reference photo also, so you can kind of so that's the thing. If you have a reference photo, you can compare that, and you can look up a reference photo for this as well as you're going along if you're going to do it on your own. I always recommend using reference photos. The eye, his right eye, and the right circle on his cheek, they're going to be a little more oval shaped than his other eye and other cheek, because again, the angle that we're seeing him from, they're going to get slightly distorted. And if you put them the same shape, if you make them pure circles, then it's not going to look correct compared to if we do it like this. It's all about perspective. Then make sure to add the little bit of line along his tail, not his tail, along his ears, because he's got these little black kind of tips on his ears. So we want to make sure we don't forget that. Then he's got stripes on his back, which are very easy to forget as well because we almost never actually see his back. It's always from the front, or almost always from the front as far as I remember. So don't forget those. Those are a part of his design. And then the tail has a little area where it goes from brown to, then it goes to the yellow. And you can either draw lines there, or just remember during the color phase that you can blend the colors together there. Depending on what you're doing and what you're using, one way might be easier than the other. The reference picture I used blended the colors together, so that's what I did in my coloring phase. Then now we move on to the lines, which is just going to be making much cleaner lines than we had originally made. If you're on paper, then you can either get a pen or a darker pencil and draw them over. If you're using a pencil, you have to be a lot more careful about erasing your sketch lines, because then you want to erase the lines you drew. You don't want to erase the lines you drew, sorry. And if you're on a program like I am, I was using Photoshop for drawing these, then you just make the lines on a separate layer, and make sure that it's a separate layer, because if not, you're going to have a heck of a time deleting all the lines later. It's a lot easier if it's all on a separate layer. Then I added, from there, I did the first lines, which was just the body itself mostly. Then I added the face afterwards. And you can, in the fingers, make sure that you notice they're a little bit weird compared to what you see now. Like, I know that the feet are fairly simplified, I think. It looks a little bit closer to his left foot, is a little more normal. Although now I think he just looks fairly, like the feet just look like ovals with lines on them. So I think it's been really simplified, and it looks a little bit cuter in the new version than in this version, because the toes look a little bit weird to me, if I'm honest. And the fingers, kind of the similar thing. I think that they gave him really stubby little fingers in the new design, whereas in this one, he's got, I think, less fingers here than he does in the new design, which might just be the angle that we're seeing his hands from. But either way, they're a little bit weird looking, but I did use, like I said, I've used a reference photo, and this is how they look. So don't try to make the changes based off what you think it'll look like. Go from the reference picture you're using. As far as the lines on the face, make sure that you notice that I had originally drawn the eyes a certain way and I'd made adjustments. Well, when I did the final lines layer, I actually made the lines over a bit more. I widened the eyes even more than I had done the first time, and I had to move the cheeks over as well, because I just, you make changes as you go. Everything you're making isn't going to be permanent. So there's that. And that's about it. Just notice that I made some changes along the way. My sketch layer wasn't perfect. It was just so I can get a grasp on what I was doing. Once you have your lines done, then you can move on to color. And that's just going to be very flat color. It's got a grayish color for the ears, which I will explain in a minute, the difference between the coloring. Well, actually, I'll explain the difference in that coloring in the next step, or the next couple steps, because I have a comparison photo to show you guys as far as colors. The yellow itself on Pikachu, I don't know exactly what shade of yellow that would be called. It feels off to me, but that might just be me. Yeah, looking at the color picker, it's actually fairly decent yellow. So that's the thing, eyes can be really deceiving. To me, it looked a little bit dingy, and if I had chosen to pick the colors myself, I probably would have gone a little different, and then I would have been wrong. I picked these colors from the image I used just so that I could show you guys exactly what the colors would be. For yourselves, I would recommend trying to pick the colors yourself so you get an idea of how to do so. The ears, I mentioned the ears already, I'm sorry. The cheeks, they're not a proper red either. They're a little closer to a pink. And the brown is just a brown, basically. The highlights are kind of a similar thing to the highlight color that I will show you in a couple steps, where they're not actually a pure white, but that's just because I picked them from the thing. You can actually probably get away with making those pure white and it's not a big deal. You'll notice real quick that on the tail I blended the colors together between the brown and the yellow. Like I said before, you can do that, or you can just make a zigzag kind of line between them, and that will work just the same. After that, you can move on to more complicated things if you like, which involves shadows and highlights. So in the picture that I used, they had shadows and highlights. I'm going to show you the shadows real quick, which is just basically a slightly more golden color for the yellow. And as far as like under his chin, below his arms, and around essentially his crotch. They actually didn't put any really on the back, on his back, which they probably could have, but it would have overcomplicated things based off of the light source. The light source is coming from his right somewhere and might be slightly behind him. So that actually would explain why there wouldn't be some shadows there, I suppose. They're fairly subtle when they're not big enough. So for example, around his ears, there are some slight shadows. And if you actually really looked at the eyes, which I unfortunately can't show you a closer view right now, but I had actually added a little bit of a darker color around his pupils, or where his pupils would be, because in the picture it kind of does that. That's not really necessary, it's just an extra little thing. Sometimes little details can be interesting to play with. And lastly is the highlight area. Now, they had a kind of, it's really weirdly shiny. I don't know why his coat is this shiny, but that's how the picture went. This is kind of, if you look at the original kind of Gen 1 types of pictures, they did this with several of the drawings. I'm not sure if this just had to do with the materials they were using and they thought it looked cool, which it does. But they don't use this kind of coloring nowadays in a lot of their drawings of the Pokemon. But I figured it'd be cool to show you guys anyways. So it's fairly white. That's mostly the only real difference, except for a slight yellowing around where the stripes are, or basically where the brown is, along his back, and in little splotches around the brown part of his tail. You might notice that there is a slight bit of yellowing, and I think that just has to do with the lighting, which, again, it's not completely necessary that you do any of these steps. This just depends on what you want to do, how far you want to go. Now I'm going to show you real quick the I'm going to show you real quick the coloring that I had mentioned, and I'm just going to compare the colors for you real quick. And if you look at the white compared to the white on the left compared to the grayish color on the right, when I'm talking about the top area here, the one on the right is the color that actually is used on the white parts of Pikachu here, and the one on the left is a pure white. And when I put them close together, you can kind of see the difference. It's slightly more gray on the right, the color that I had originally picked off of the original picture. And you can go with either one, but you'll notice that it's a little more subtle. So I think you can kind of get away with the slightly more gray as opposed to the white. The white might be too bright. You'll also see that on the left, on the bottom, is a true black. I pulled a straight up complete black coloring. This is as black of a color as you can get. And on the right is a kind of medium to dark gray. And that's actually the color we used for the black in his eyes and the tips of his ears. So it's very easy to want to make those pure black because that's the stuff that you have. But if you do have a gray, I would recommend using that instead if you are using black lines. Now, if you're working in pen and paper, you can probably get away with making those pure black just because of simplification. Depends on your choice. If you're adding shadows, though, I would not recommend it because then you won't be able to put in the shadows around any black areas. Okay, and that should be it for now. Thank you for watching my video. I hope this helped. Let me know if it did or if there's things that I can improve on. This is my first time in a long time starting back up with my tutorials, so I would love some input. Okay, so that's it for now. See you guys next time. Bye!